What is up, everybody? My name is SirEmCeeCoy, and welcome to the first part of the TCU Horned Frogs edited offseason. I had a lot of issues with the stream where the audio got distorted within like 20-30 minutes. So I did upload the full stream, but for those of you who did watch, you will realize that the audio is all screwed up. So I decided to make this video and two more to follow, which are the off seasons, basically in an edited version. The first part is purely season recap. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this episode and this episode only. Our stats from the previous season with all of our seniors that are leaving. So let's jump right into it. Season recap. To start, we're going to look at our quarterback, Boykin. 215 completed out of 315. That's not bad. That puts him in around, I want to say 67, 68, 69, somewhere in that range for a completion percentage. It's not, it's not the best, but for considering what he had been used to throwing, that's not bad at all. He finishes with 2,608 yards through the air, a career high for him, 20 touchdowns to 16 interceptions, about 186 yards per game. We're obviously not a throwing team, and there it is, 67% completion percentage. His longest was 54, and he was sacked only 13 times, so a little less than one sack per game, which is not bad at all for Boykin. I was extremely impressed between his ability to roll out of the pocket and our offensive line. He didn't get sacked much. We're going to take a look at the comparison. His quarterback rating has gone up from the years. The completions have gone up. His attempts actually went down, so his completion percentage did go up. His passing yards continued to climb every single year. Touchdowns continued to climb, and interceptions went down. His yard per game went up. Everything went up for Boykin from year to year, and that's really what was most important. That regardless of, the interceptions, yes, were a problem, but he continued to get better year by year by year. And that's really all you can expect from your star quarterback. He was sacked less times this year than any other year. 19 the first year, 21 the next, and then only 13 this year. That's all you can really ask of your starting quarterback, to do his job and not get sacked. On the ground, that was one of his biggest assets, and he had the most yards again. The same amount of attempts from last year, but almost 150 more yards. That's impressive. His average was the best of his 3 years playing. His average yards per game were actually down, but I think that was a little bit because we did avoid the option a little more than we were used to. He did have his most rushing touchdowns, though, this year with 12. So 32 total touchdowns for Boykin as a senior. He had a 55-yard, his shortest long run, but still he had the most yards of his entire career on the ground. And the yards after first hit were one that definitely impressed me, along with 11 rushes of 20 or more. Trayvon Boykin, when he could get out, he could do it. 13 broken tackles, 6 fumbles compared to the 10 last year. I want to say a few of those are actual legitimate fumbles, but a lot can definitely be attested to the triple option play, late pitches that just should not have been made. And which I take credit for it. That is definitely not Boykin's fault. That is my fault more than anything else, just making stupid plays on the triple option or panicking and trying to get rid of the ball. So, not really too disappointed. I'd say maybe 2 or 3 of those, actually, because I know he did get that strip from behind fumble a few weeks ago, and I just cannot quite remember any others. I try to forget the fumbles. Those aren't plays you like to remember, right? So moving on, we're time to look at our rushing stats, and the big one is this guy, Heisman winner, B.J. Catalon. What a career this guy had. His carries continued to go up. They went up by 100 into his junior, and only up by about 25 this year. His yards, though, did go up astronomically, as did his average yards per rush. I love seeing that jump from the sophomore to junior year. That was the big one. And then basically matching but getting a little bit better on that production in his senior year, which that's really all that matters. Continue with the production going up. His average yards per game peaked at 161.2. That is crazy. Of course, 24 rushing touchdowns on the year, finishing with 43. That's very good. He almost doubled his rushing touchdowns from last year, and he had a 92-yard scamper in the season, which set a record. Yards after first hit, he was a little far behind. He wasn't really breaking as many tackles this year as he was just making defenders miss. His juking and his spinning were absolutely dirty this year, and you see that turned into 24 rushes of 20 or more yards. He has the same amount of rushes more than 20 yards as he does touchdowns. I wonder if that correlates. Broken tackles, he ended up with only 16. He wasn't really a breakthrough, and no rushing fumbles. That's all you can really ask of your main guy. No fumbles. When you have your star running back that doesn't fumble, that's huge. Now through the air, he definitely saw the least amount of production, and the main reason behind that was we weren't really throwing screens this year. The screens, they either worked like astronomically well, or they were shut down way far in the backfield, and it just got to the point where I didn't like running the screens that much, so I just stopped throwing them. I did mess around with wide receiver screens a little bit, and I occasionally did throw a screen his way, but obviously not as much as years before. He didn't have a receiving touchdown this year, and I believe that's probably a large part of it. And yeah, he just really wasn't a huge threat in the receiving game. He never really was. He couldn't really catch over the middle, no offense, Catalan, but he's a running back. He's meant to run the football. If we can have a two-dimensional one, that's great. But, oh well. And we're going to take a quick look here at his catching, just to see. Yeah, 67, he's not a catching running back. And that's perfectly fine. We already looked at Trayvon Boykin's rushing stats. We're going to take one last peek at that. We're just going to look at his overalls. And back to the passing. I made a little mistake there in the stream. Looking at Aaron Green now, the senior. He actually had more yards, which surprised me. I expected this to be probably his worst season, but he did have more yards compared to last season. Not by much, only 12, but the big thing with him is he didn't have as many rushing touchdowns. He came in last year to be our red zone guy, and this year he didn't really do that as much. Receiving one of the most improved players on the team, if not the most improved player on the team, was number 20, Deontay Gray. Last year he had 11 receptions for only 176 yards. I was considering him a bust at that point. I benched him near the end of the season because he just wasn't getting things done, dropping footballs and everything else like that. And then he came back in a big way. 52 receptions, 720 yards, 7 touchdowns. Deontay Gray really did prove himself as a senior, and I'm really happy to see that. Deontay Gray wasn't a bad receiver. It's just he sometimes just vanished on the football field. You wouldn't see of him, you wouldn't hear of him. He just kind of disappeared when he was out there. And I still saw that a little bit his senior year, but he definitely did a good job of fixing it. Still the drop passes, part of it is the hands, and a big part of that is he's a smaller guy coming across the middle. He's going to get crushed. One guy that came out of nowhere for his senior year was Ladarius Brown. I expected him to do a little better, but his speed was the big thing that hindered him. He had size, he could run through guys, but he just wasn't quite... He just didn't have the speed, and I like speed in a receiver. He finished with 5 touchdowns on the season. I can't really complain about that. 560 yards, almost 50 receptions, but I expected more out of him. And Josh Doctson, he did see a big decline, and I don't want to say that's part of his fault. I think it's Deontay Gray stepping up. He ended up finishing with almost 90 less yards than he did the season before. The same amount of touchdowns, but you see that the yards basically stay within the same area as do the touchdowns, so Josh Doctson was overall consistent throughout his entire career. 5 touchdowns sophomore year, 4 junior year, 4 senior year. I mean, even the longest reception from the year before was the exact same. Doctson was pretty much an image of consistency. That includes some of his drops that he made. But otherwise, Josh Doctson, I was extremely impressed with his play throughout his entire career. It's going to be sad to see him go. Our wide receiver core is going to be missing out on a lot. This is one player that I really wish I utilized more, Griffin Gilbert. Griffin Gilbert was our tight end for 3 years, and he showed flashes of being great, and I just did not take advantage of him this season. He only finishes with 19 catches for 284. He had 466 last year and 402 the year before. He matched the touchdown production, but a lot of those touchdowns were in the first 2 weeks and then the very last. And you see, he has what it takes. He's got an 83 speed, 99 awareness, 88 catch. I just didn't take advantage of that, and that's the one thing that I wish I would have done more, is throw the football to Griffin Gilbert. Now we're looking at this guy, Mr. Colby Listenby. He is going to be our number 1 wide receiver next year. He has 14 catches in his entire career, and they came this year with 167 yards and no touchdowns. We are going to have to rely on Colby Listenby to be our number 1 guy. And it is going to be very interesting to see what this wide receiver core does, being how fresh they are. There's 14 receptions there, and past Colby Listenby, there is little to no experience in the wide receiver department. Colby Listenby, he's going to have to step up big. He did make some big plays late in the season, but he's going to need to step that up. And this is our other guy that has receptions, Ty Slanina, who we'll be seeing next year. Outside of these two, nobody else that's going to be a starting wide receiver has yet to make a catch. We have 15 catches between our wide receiver core for next year. 15. I don't know what it's going to take. That's excluding Charlie Reed, of course, and Avery Davis. But just our wide receivers have 15 catches going into next year. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with this wide receiver core next year. But let's move on. Let's look at defense. I was extremely happy with our defense a lot during the season. And one guy that I was so impressed with was Jamal Schroeder. The sophomore came in and just took over this defense. 81 tackles, 11 behind the line, 3 sacks, an interception, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery. Jamal Schroeder did it all as a middle linebacker. He's not exactly the most athletic, but he translates what he has into football. And that's all that matters. I don't care about, what's your 40 time? How much can you bench? It's about translating it onto the football field. One guy, on the other hand, that does have the athletic ability and the speed is Scott Brandt, the freshman right outside linebacker. He was also so impressive. 68 tackles, 11 behind the line, 4 sacks, a forced fumble. Scott Brandt was the best of true freshmen could have been. Junior strong safety Derek Kindred, who I am considering moving over to free safety. He did good. He took advantage of having a full-time role and did the best. 16 tackles behind the line for a strong safety. That is insane. He did not have an interception though. That's why I'm thinking about moving him to free safety. I feel like his hard-hitting play fits more the free safety mold. So we're going to move him over there and kind of see how he does there. Hopefully it translates to turnovers, but continual, hitting, getting those tackles behind the line. Moving on, we're just going to look at players that we'll be seeing next year. Actually, we're looking at this. We have Zach Jackson and Derek Kindred. And this is where I feel Zach Jackson will be better staying as a strong safety, and we do move Kindred to free safety. Just wanted to compare those two. But now we're moving on to Chris Hackett. Surprisingly, his production went down a little bit in terms of tackles, but he stepped up the turnovers, which is what I'm hoping to see Kindred do. He went from 1 interception, was in the very last week, to 4. And that's really what I wanted out of our senior free safety. Chris Hackett, winning the Thorpe, he was quietly one of the best players on our team. He came in clutch, making huge tackles almost all the time. You saw it throughout the season. Extremely happy with the way Chris Hackett played. Speaking of coming in clutch, let's look at James McFarland. And first, let's look at that hardware. The Lombardi, the Nagurski, and the Bednarik. His trophy case is going to be a little full at home. 52 tackles this year, 28 were behind the line. That is more than half of his tackles behind the line. That is insane. 15 sacks. I was hoping he would go for the record near the end of the season, but he just did not quite get there. But still, what a season for James McFarland. He was an absolute force to be reckoned at the left end, constantly getting pressure. Another player that I was extremely impressed with was Zach Jackson. He almost matched his stats, but last year he did it very quietly. This year, he stood out. 45 tackles, 7 behind the line. No turnovers, but this year I was able to see Zach Jackson. He had that defensive touchdown where he scooped and scored late in Season 2. That's the only time I ever even remember hearing his name. This year, I was calling out Zach Jackson's name constantly, whether it's making big plays in the run game or good coverage. Zach Jackson was extremely impressive for us. And I'm excited to see what he can do as a starting strong safety. He basically played in dime and sub packages, but he's going to have to step it up big next year to possibly fight out Derek Kindred for either the strong safety or free safety spot. It's still really up in the air. Moving on, we're going to look at, who are we looking at? Davion Pearson, another senior who stepped it up, had 39 tackles, 13 more than he did last year, 3 more behind the line than last year, and 6 sacks. 2 coming in the very last game. 11 sacks in a career for a defensive tackle is extremely impressive. He was a run stopper first, but he could still get pressure on the quarterback. A forced fumble. Davion Pearson, solid defensive tackle, never had any issues with him. One player that he still had a good season, but I set the bar so high for him that I was disappointed was Devontae Fields. 28 tackles, 10 less than last year, 1 less tackle behind the line, and only 10 sacks. I expected him to have the kind of season that McFarland did, but even better. Sure, he did have a defensive touchdown, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. So I guess in that terms he did good, but I just set the bar so ridiculously high for Devontae Fields that when he didn't quite reach that expectation that I had for him, I guess I was a little disappointed. I mean, he was still an All-American, but I just expected more out of him. Tevin Lawson, another defensive lineman, the youngster, he did great stepping in this season. 31 tackles, 13 behind the line, 6 sacks. This guy, he's lanky. He has the ability to get off blocks and get in the backfield. 2 more guys we're going to look at. Colby Griffin, one of the most improved. He went from being a nickel guy who would get a lot of tackles behind the line to a turnover machine. Didn't have a single interception his first year to 5 interceptions on the outside, along with 7 pass deflections, a pick 6, 1 sack, 4 tackles behind the line. Colby Griffin did amazing. And finally, we're going to look at Marcus Bass, another true freshman. 19 tackles, 1 behind the line. He had 2 interceptions and 3 pass deflections. This guy's going to be our number 1 corner next year. I'm excited to see what Marcus Bass can do for us. It'll be interesting. Well, that is it for our player stats. We're going to look here. We'll see that I won Coach of the Year. That's a pretty interesting honor to bring home. And when you look at this, it's kind of easy to see why. 13-1, our first time winning the Big 12 in team history since coming to the Big 12. It took us 4 years, but we did it. 13-1, and the bar is set even higher for us next year. We go from winning the Cotton Bowl to the Big 12 and the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. Thank you guys for watching. This was just part 1 of the offseason. There are 2 more parts to come. They will be coming hopefully very, very soon. It all depends on what my computer decides to do with me. So thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe and leave a like. And get hyped for Season 4 of the TCU Horned Frogs Dynasty.